Most people think talking to yourself is strange, maybe even a little lonely. You catch yourself muttering while you're working, rehearsing a conversation in the shower, arguing with an imaginary version of someone who isn't even there. And if someone walks in halfway through it, you immediately pretend you weren't talking. But psychology has a much more interesting explanation, because sometimes talking to yourself isn't a sign that you're disconnected from reality. It can be a sign that you're trying to connect with your own mind, and depending on how you use that voice, it may reveal 6 powerful psychological traits. So let's open the file. Case file number 009, The Hidden Psychology of People Who Talk to Themselves. And the first clue goes back much further than adulthood. This habit often begins in childhood. A child doesn't have the same internal tools an adult does for navigating uncertainty, emotion, and complicated experiences, so they talk. They narrate what they're doing, they ask questions out loud, they explain things to themselves. They might say, "Okay, first I have to do this," or "Why did that happen?" or even, "Don't touch that." To an adult, it can sound like random chatter, but psychologically, something important is happening. The child is using language to organize thought and guide behavior. The psychologist Lev Vygotsky spent significant time studying this process. He proposed that what begins as spoken language can gradually become internal speech, the quiet voice that helps us plan, regulate ourselves, and make sense of experience. In other words, the voice that once helped you navigate the outside world can eventually become part of the machinery you use to navigate the inside one. For most people, that voice becomes almost completely internal. For some people, it stays partially external. They think out loud, they rehearse, they question themselves, they explain things aloud, and that doesn't necessarily mean something is wrong. Sometimes, they're simply making their thinking audible, and that's where the first trait appears. Trait 1. Higher self-awareness. People who regularly talk to themselves may be giving their thoughts something most thoughts never receive: attention. Think about the difference. Someone feels angry and simply reacts. A self-talker might stop and ask, "Why am I actually angry?" Someone makes a decision and moves on. Another person might replay it later. "Why did I choose that? Was that actually what I wanted?" That external conversation can act like a psychological mirror. You're not only experiencing yourself, you're observing yourself, and that distinction matters, because self-awareness isn't just knowing what you're feeling. It's being able to step back and examine why you're feeling it. The person talking to themselves isn't necessarily being lonely. Sometimes they're conducting a private interview with the one person they spend their entire life with: themselves. Trait 2. Stronger. Problem solving. Here's another reason people talk to themselves. They're stuck. Maybe it's a work problem. Maybe they're fixing something. Maybe they're trying to understand a complicated decision. And suddenly you hear, "Okay, if I do this first. No, wait, that won't work. What if I try this?" That might sound chaotic, but speaking can force vague thoughts into a more organized structure. An idea that felt blurry inside your head has to become a sentence. And once it's a sentence, you can examine it, challenge it, change it, reject it, try another one. That's closely related to what's known as self-explanation, using explanation to make your own reasoning clearer. The problem doesn't necessarily become easier, but now you can actually see the steps. Sometimes, talking through a problem doesn't give your brain a new answer. It simply gives the answer you already had somewhere to stand. Trait 3. Emotional regulation. This one gets especially interesting. Imagine you're nervous before something important. Instead of, "I can't do this," you say, "Okay, you've handled things like this before." Or you use your own name, "Mikey, relax. You've got this." That tiny shift can create psychological distance. Research by psychologist Ethan Kross and colleagues has explored how using one's own name or non-first-person language can change the way people relate to difficult emotions. You're no longer completely immersed inside the feeling. You're coaching yourself from a slight distance. And that changes the role of the inner voice. It isn't just describing the emotion, it's regulating it. The anxious voice says, "What if everything goes wrong?" Another part responds, "Maybe, but let's deal with what's actually happening." That's not weakness. That's a mind attempting to manage itself in real time. Trait 4. Creativity. There's another hidden advantage. Talking to yourself gives your ideas something silent. Thinking doesn't always provide another perspective. You can ask a question, then answer it. Argue with yourself. Change positions. Say, "What if we did this?" Then immediately respond, "No," because that creates a tiny internal debate. And suddenly, one mind starts behaving like several. The idea becomes something you can manipulate, twist, combine, challenge, rebuild. That's why you may see people pacing while thinking, muttering while designing, or explaining an idea to an empty room. They're not necessarily losing control. They may be using language to give their thoughts a physical structure. The conversation is private, but the thinking is active. Trait 5. Independence of thought. Most people, when uncertain, immediately reach outward. They ask someone, they search online, they scroll, they look for an opinion. But someone who regularly talks through their own reasoning has another option. They can turn inward first. That doesn't mean they never ask for help. It means they have developed a habit of consulting themselves before consulting everyone else. They hear their own reasoning, they question it, they test it, and if it survives the test, they may trust it. In a world where you're constantly being told what to think, what to buy, how to feel, and who to become, being able to hear your own reasoning through all that noise is valuable, almost rebellious. Trait 6. Continuous personal growth. And maybe the most interesting trait is this. The conversation doesn't stop when the problem is solved. After a difficult day, the person may replay what happened. Before an important event, they rehearse. After making a mistake, they ask, "What could I have done differently? What did I learn? What do I do next time?" That's a feedback loop. The person isn't just living experiences. They're processing them, turning experience into information. And over time, that can become a powerful form of self-reflection. But here's where the case takes a darker turn. Because every strength has a shadow. The same mind that can generate possibilities can eventually generate too many. One conversation becomes 10 possible interpretations. One mistake becomes an entire courtroom. One awkward moment gets replayed at 2 a.m., like evidence in a trial nobody asked for. The person starts asking, "Did I say the wrong thing? What did they mean by that? Why did I react like that? What if I had done something differently?" And eventually, the problem isn't self-talk itself. It's the belief that every thought needs an answer. The mind keeps searching for certainty, but certainty keeps moving. The more it tries to understand everything, the less peaceful everything feels. The voice that once created clarity can become the voice that refuses to let the case close. And this is the turning point. The goal was never to silence the voice. Your mind is supposed to produce thoughts, questions, possibilities, warnings, memories, emotions. The real skill is learning the difference between listening to a thought and obeying it. A thought can appear without becoming a command. A worry can exist without becoming a prediction. An emotion can be felt without becoming your identity. Instead of asking, "Is this thought true?" every single time, sometimes you can simply ask, "Interesting. Why did my mind produce that?" That's psychological distance. You stop treating every thought like a verdict. The conversation continues. But now you're listening with curiosity instead of fear. The voice isn't your enemy. It was trying to help you navigate. You just don't have to follow every direction it gives. 6 traits, 1 quiet voice, and 1 habit most people dismiss without ever asking what it's actually doing. Remember that. Talking to yourself isn't automatically a sign of intelligence, creativity, or psychological health. Context matters. What matters most is how the voice functions in your life. If it helps you organize, reflect, regulate, create, and grow, then maybe that conversation isn't something to be embarrassed about. Maybe it's one of the ways your mind takes care of you. So here's the question. When you're alone, do you talk to yourself? Do you rehearse conversations? Argue with yourself? Coach yourself through difficult moments? Or explain what you're doing as if someone else is listening? Tell me in the comments. And more importantly, what does your voice usually say? Because sometimes the strangest habits aren't random at all. They're clues. Case file number 009. The hidden psychology of people who talk to themselves. The case is now closed. But remember, every mind leaves clues.